Deputy Minister of Arts, Technology and Science, was a co-accused with Ms. Falati in the 1991 Stompie Sepe kidnapping case. Megan Rissy reports.
Mrs. Mandela is trying to stop Mrs. Falati from making any public allegations against her. Last month, the court ruled that Mrs. Falati couldn't hold a news conference or make defamatory remarks about Mrs. Mandela. She now claims that the interdict against her is a misuse of the court process.
What I want to achieve is the freedom of speech in a democratic society.
Mrs. Falati has further challenged Mrs. Mandela to sue her for defamation. Mrs. Mandela claims her former associate's conduct violated her dignity. Ms. Falati's counsel said the interdict has a chilling effect on the discussion of matters plainly of public importance. He said that in American law, a restraining order of this kind is simply not available, except in the most extraordinary of circumstances. The battle between the Deputy Minister and her former confidant continues tomorrow.
Malige vriendin en medebeskuldigde in die Stompie Sepe saak, Madikizela Falati, gewaarsku om op te hou met nuwe beweringe teen die adjunkminister van Kuns, Kultuur en Tegnologie. Die prokureur, meneer Templeton Mageza, sê aan 'n brief aan Falati dat sy sedert haar vrylating uit die tronk in Maart in verskeie koerantartikels valse en lasterlike beweringe gemaak het wat duidelik bedoel is om mevrou Mandela te ondermyn. Die redakteur van City Press, meneer Kulu Sibiya, het vandag gesê dat mevrou Falati sy weekblad meegedeel het dat sy Dinsdag 'n internasionale nuuskonferensie hou om meer inligting oor mevrou Mandela se deelname aan wreedhede bekend te maak. Mevrou Mandela se prokureur het mevrou Falati meegedeel dat die hulp van die Hooggeregshof ingeroep sal word tensy sy haar nuuskonferensie teen maandagmiddag aflas en onderneem om mevrou Mandela nie langer te ondermyn nie.
A Rand Supreme Court judge has dismissed the application by Winnie Mandela to gag her former associate Madikizela Falati. The judge also set aside an interim order which prevented Ms. Falati from holding a news conference on alleged atrocities committed by Mrs. Mandela. Although Ms. Falati is now free to talk, she remains tight-lipped about the damaging information she allegedly has on the Deputy Minister. Mrs. Mandela said she was pleased Ms. Falati could now make her allegations so that she could defend herself. This report from Caro Creel and Leonie Koch.
3 years ago, Mandela and Falati were convicted for their part in the Stompie Sepe kidnap and assault case. On appeal, Mandela's jail term was substituted with a fine, while Falati spent 1 year in jail. Less than a month ago, Mandela got an interim court interdict restraining Falati from making defamatory statements about her. Today, Mr. Justice Rex van Schalkwyk ruled in favor of Falati and discharged Mandela's application for an extension on the interdict with costs. He said no politician should be allowed to silence his or her critics. A relieved Falati held an impromptu news conference after her victory, but she was evasive on allegations against Mrs. Mandela.
I am not going to comment on that now. This is not the right time.
Falati's lawyers said the judgment was important for press freedom.
It will be very difficult in the future to get gagging orders, prior restraining orders upon the press, where the press would publish allegations that may be damaging, particularly of public officials.
Mrs. Mandela was guest of honor at the opening of a convention center in Pretoria this morning.
This opens an avenue for her to go to the press. She can make whatever allegations. I'll respond to those. It will in fact be better for me because then I can take action against her for libel.
Details of Ms. Falati's scheduled press conference are not yet known. Okay, and Ms. Roll is going to come out now. There she is, there she is. Okay, let's go around the back. Ms. Falati, how do you feel after your victory?
I'm very happy, very much happy.
And when are you going to make known what you know about Mrs. Mandela?
Until everything is in the hands of my lawyer.
Can we expect a press conference this afternoon still?
I do not know from my...
But you're glad you won?
Very much happy. You know, leadership in a capitalist country is based on material possession and is suffocating and always oppressive.
Can you give us any idea of the allegations that you're going to make?
No.
That's a matter that will be dealt with at a press conference later today.
Later today?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All right.
What's your reaction to the judgment?
I'm very, very happy. I'm very, very happy about the judgment, especially because we have achieved democracy. And it's our right. It's the right of every person to freedom of speech and freedom of association. That is freedom of movement. If I have lost this case, it means even the press was going to be gagged. And that's all.
Mrs. Palati, are you intending perhaps giving the story, or is there a story to be told?
I am not going to comment on that now.
Are you going to call an international news conference later?
I'm not going to comment on that.
So when are we going to know? I mean, with that this court case, and there are alleged information that you want to give about Mrs. Mandela, when can we expect to know what that is? And can you give us any idea of when the press conference is going to be?
I'm not going to comment on that now.
But Mrs. Palati, will this not mean perhaps you are only driven by anger and perhaps you don't have any story to tell? Will that not be the implication?
You can take it the way you take it, but this is not the right time for anything now.
Why
I'm still happy about the court proceedings and the outcome.
Why is it not the right time to talk now?
No, I'm still too much excited of winning, at least, and very wise or intelligent. Actually knows whatever.
Do you feel Winnie's
Things which she knows about.
Are you
And then that is why when I came out of prison, I said the leadership must not create a Frankenstein monster, which the leadership knows, which I cannot disclose them here.
Are you seeking any sort of redress or compensation from Mrs. Mandela or from the ANC? Have you made any demands at all?
No, I've tried to get some compensation from the political prisoners support committee, but they said I can't get it after a meeting was called, and they said they cannot give me. But I was so surprised because John Mogwen, with the same charges and in the same trial of Stompy, but he got some compensation.
Have you tried to speak to Nelson Mandela about this?
I do not want to involve my president. He is a rare specimen of a human being.
Sorry, the fact that you're not making it creates the impression that you're continuing to threaten to make Joe Mrs. Mandela.
No, I'm not going to elaborate on that. I'm not going to comment on that.
But are you threatening
until such time?
Until such time as you make further disclosure?
I'm not going to answer that question. Telling my people the commitment in the struggle.
Sorry, Mrs. Farage, at some point you said Winnie didn't want to listen.
No, I'm referring.
Was it in connection with the atrocities?
I'm not going to. No. If you regard yourself as an upper class, you don't have to entertain the lower classes. No.
Very exciting.
Can you just explain to us what the importance of Judgment Stanford's judgment is?
Yes, I think it has two very important implications, both of them relating directly to the Constitution and its application to ordinary citizens' rights. The first of them is that it vindicates the right of a citizen to come to court and say that no restraining order is available, certainly not at the instance of a minister of the state, to restrain that citizen from revealing things that may be damaging to a minister in the occupancy of that minister's office. That's the first very important aspect of the judgment. It's a citizen's charter judgment. The second important aspect of the decision is that it really liberates our law in many important respects as far as press freedom is concerned, because the implications of the judgment are that it will be very difficult in the future to get gagging orders, prior restraining orders upon the press, where the press would publish allegations that may be damaging, particularly of public officials. Judge van Schalkwyk devoted important passages in his judgment to the foundational importance of a free press, and he said that when one looks at that value and one compares it with other values recognized in the Constitution and other rights such as the right of dignity, the rights of the press and the value of freedom of expression really underlines all liberty. So it's a classical libertarian account of the importance of free speech in a democratic society, and it reverses the position in our common law, and it's really a decision of fundamental importance.
There's something that I don't understand. He said, although this was a matter, a private dispute.
Yes.
Now, doesn't the Constitution only make provision for a citizen against the state? And what was the implication of that?
Well, that's another further aspect of the judgment that's of enormous importance. There is a major constitutional issue which our courts are grappling with, which is to what extent the Constitution is of application in disputes between private individuals, where ordinarily the common law alone would govern that kind of dispute. And Judge van Schalkwyk has taken the position that the terms of the Constitution, at least as far as free speech are concerned, are sufficiently clear to indicate that it is plainly of application in private disputes between citizens. And he says that that is particularly so because the value of free speech is really something which in important instances can only be enforced if the Constitution is to have horizontal rather than vertical application. So from that point of view as well, as to the reach and ambit of the Constitution, the case is of fundamental importance. It's the first constitutional decision which has made a judgment on this issue, and it has taken a wide and liberal view of the Constitution. It has said that the spirit of the Constitution is to protect all persons, and that is something that can often only be done by ensuring that the Constitution is of horizontal and not purely of application by a citizen against the state in its various forms. So that too is of fundamental importance.
What about the right to dignity?
Judge van Schalkwyk did not in any way underestimate the importance of the right of dignity. He simply said that when one construes the Constitution and understands the values that underlie it, although you can get conflicts between rights, you have to make some judgment as to which rights are the more important. And he took it based on reference.
Well, National Police Commissioner George Fivers today said misperceptions had been formed surrounding last week's raid on the Soweto home of Mrs. Mandela. In a statement from Pretoria, Commissioner Fivers said the approval and issuing of the search warrant lay squarely within the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice and the relevant magistrate. President Mandela has dismissed a possible meeting with his estranged wife to discuss Winnie's conduct as Deputy Minister in the Government of National Unity. Speaking to journalists at Tynhuys, President Mandela said he had entrusted Executive Deputy President Thabo Mbeki with the task of resolving the controversy surrounding Mrs. Mandela. Mrs. Mandela issued a statement yesterday dismissing her meeting with Mr. Mbeki and opting instead for an audience with Mr. Mandela.
I leave everything to Mr. Mbeki. And I'm sure Mr. Mbeki will not find any necessity for anybody else to intervene in this matter because he is quite competent. He will deal with it.
President Mandela says he is fast losing patience with unruly school.
Clearly, the forces of reaction have not yet recovered from the hammer blows they sustained during the April elections, which predictably brought the triumph of the masses. Their latest avalanche of attacks against me not only betrays their contempt for the aspirations and wishes of ANC-supporting masses one gets the feeling that a vendetta is pursued by charlatans and cowards who, like mosquitoes, disappear with the night. The fight against those who are perceived to be pillars of ANC mass support has now become obvious and transparent. It is only the naive and myopic who will fail to comprehend the broader diabolical objectives of those bent to demonize me and those of my comrades they perceive as obstacles to their long-term reactionary strategic goal. In defense of the aspirations of my people, I am left with no choice but to take the challenge head-on.
Good evening. Welcome to the last headline news of the week. Embattled Deputy Arts, Culture, Science and Technology Minister Winnie Mandela today vowed to take the challenge head-on against what she termed the broader diabolical objectives of people she said were bent on demonizing her. In her first comment since she was accused of corruption this week, Mrs. Mandela said in the prepared statement read out by her lawyer, Templeton Mageza, that she was left with no option but to take up the challenge. Mrs. Mandela was not present when Mr. Mageza read out the statement at his Central Johannesburg office.
I am therefore not surprised by the latest episode. Suffice to say that in the end, I shall triumph and my people will be the beneficiaries.
Meanwhile, George Fivers says Winnie Mandela's fundamental rights were not violated by police this week when they entered and searched her house in Orlando West, Soweto. Commissioner Fivers says police acted within the legal framework.
As far as I am aware, we have applied for a warrant to search the premises. It was granted by a magistrate, and obviously it's within the framework of our legal system in South Africa. So I don't think it was an infringement of Chapter 3 of the Constitution.
Says Mrs. Mandela is quite disturbed by the coincidence between her arrival from West Africa and the murder of Paul Manana, a squatter camp leader whom she says championed her cause.
Mr. Manana was murdered last night in Tembisa, less than an hour after he had appeared on television voicing support for Deputy Minister Winnie Mandela. Mrs. Mandela's spokesman Alan Reynolds says she visited the squatter camp in Tembisa after hearing of Mr. Manana's death. No details were immediately available on how he was killed and on whether the police have arrested any suspects.
And after the event of last year, April 1994, we still have raids which are in fact Gestapo style by police, totally outside of the ordinary bounds to which they are in fact constrained to by law.
Right. Gentlemen, we are Mrs. Mandela's lawyers in this specific matter. We've been mandated by her to, in fact, convey and read to the press a specific statement which, in fact, she has coordinated and collated. The statement reads as follows. Press statement by Mrs. Winnie Mandela. Clearly, the forces of reaction have not yet recovered from the hammer blows they sustained during the April elections, which predictably brought the triumph of the masses. Their latest avalanche of attacks against me not only betrays their contempt for the aspirations and wishes of ANC-supporting masses, one gets the feeling that a vendetta is pursued by charlatans and cowards who, like mosquitoes, disappear with the night. The fight against those who are perceived to be pillars of ANC mass support has now become obvious and transparent. It is only the naive and myopic who will fail to comprehend the broader diabolical objectives of those bent to demonize me and those of my comrades they perceive as obstacles to their long-term reactionary strategic goal. In defense of the aspirations of my people, I am left with no choice but to take the challenge head-on. I must say that I find it unacceptable that the raids on my offices and house were carried out in my absence and in a manner which leads me to believe that they were intended to attract as much publicity as possible. I am informed that the media arrived at my residence and offices approximately 15 minutes before the police arrived to conduct the search. By now, I am used to being tried through the media. I am therefore not surprised by the latest episode. Suffice to say that in the end, I shall triumph and my people will be the beneficiaries. I want to further add that yesterday afternoon, when Mrs. Mandela came back from Ivory Coast, community members and basically were at the airport in order to convey their support for her. A community leader by the name of Paul Manana was in fact leading the delegation of community members who were in fact at the airport. He in fact spoke on television and conveyed his support for Mrs. Mandela. What has transpired is that last night the same gentleman was in fact shot in front of his house and he died. Mrs. Mandela presently is on her way to Tembisa, where the gentleman lives. We believe it's a squatter area, but we don't have any further, details regarding the shooting.
And when you went to court this morning, right, what are your specific instructions which you had from Mrs. Mandela?
When we went to court, we basically were going to court to seek an order from the judge to in fact order that the police should give to us certain information which they gave to the magistrate who in fact issued the original search warrants.
When the search was conducted at Mrs. Mandela, was there any person or does a warrant allow anyone to allow the police to break into the house and search?
Warrants don't allow that for that. In this specific instance, what has transpired is that the police got to the house when there was nobody at home. They climbed over the walls. Many of them stood on top of the walls and on top of the roofs. The policemen concerned actually had their own set of keys to Mrs. Mandela's house. No one knows where they secured these keys from. They gained access without anybody representing Mrs. Mandela actually supervising them. They commenced their search totally without supervision and alone in the house. At some stage, Mrs. Mandela's helper basically came into the house. She arrived there and found all the police. She came into the house and she was promptly told to get out of the house by the policeman, although she identified herself. So we've got a very serious problem. That's one of the issues that in essence is going to become relevant to the whole question of the validity of the search itself. Because obviously, I mean, a search of this nature, for it to be conducted without supervision, wherein police gain access, without the house owner's presence, is a bit of a difficult situation which the police are going to find themselves in.
And in connection with the building for companies that are supposedly involved with Mrs. Mandela, what actions were taken on that? With the police report saying that Mrs. Mandela made 50% shares available to her daughter Zinzi and all that. Is that going?
At this stage, what we are saying is that Mrs. Mandela knows nothing of the sort. It is up to the police ultimately to prove those specific charges. But the point is this, that at this present stage, we are dealing with the question of the validity of a search warrant. If the police want to ultimately charge Mrs. Mandela on those allegations, they are free to do so.
With regard to the death of the squatter leader, do you think it's in any way connected with the events leading up to Mrs. Mandela returning from a West Africa visit?
Mrs. Mandela is quite perturbed by the coincidence. The fact that this squatter leader was actually at the airport to welcome her back together with the community, and only to find that that very night he is in fact shot by mysterious people. She is really concerned about that. There is an odd coincidence, but however, she is not necessarily saying that the two are completely connected. The police will investigate the issue, and we will find out, all of us, as to what really transpired.
I'm trying to make you famous.
No question.
So, something.
That's it.
Yeah.
Stop smiling, Spokes. All right, guys.
Everybody smile. Smile.
Ten seconds, right? Good. Thank you.
Happy?
With death, like what has happened here, in order to ensure that she's isolated. There is indeed.
Do you think that these two, that this incident is some way connected to the latest happenings over the last week?
It is definitely connected. It is about the Winnie Mandela squatter camp. It is about development there. It is about exactly the issues that we are about that surrounds our mama here.
You have a strong belief, as does Mrs. Mandela, that you are the target and is Mrs. Mandela of some kind of discrediting campaign.
The aim of this campaign, and I'm sure it is a campaign, I'm not guessing. I have my own documents that will prove that a campaign was indeed launched, Operation Communication, allowed by President like himself, and I've spoken to some of the security officials who can confirm that that campaign indeed is there. The unfortunate thing about it is that they are able to manipulate so many of our people about this campaign. This is all about the local elections, the campaign that is coming. They were scared as to when they saw what happened at Bloemfontein, and they are scared that the ANC maybe might be moving too far to the radical, is becoming too militant. They want to cut the umbilical cord between the ANC and the people by discrediting those of its leaders who are closer to the so-called marginalized communities like the squatter people. But we must promise them that this one they will lose, like they've lost the election. This one they will lose, like they've lost all battles.
What do you and Mrs. Mandela say to your detractors who are, or to Mrs. Mandela's detractors who are saying that really it is time, you know, that who are criticising her and so on? What is your message?
Well, we are saying that from now on we will not take these attacks lying down. We will face whatever battle that comes our way, whether we are left alone or we fight collectively. We will win this battle. For that decision we have taken. And thank you.
How will this affect
Mandela,